Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today is a Q&A with some of my favourite people on the planet. Our topic is having a holiday on your holiday. And in this first part of the series, we discuss the importance of having a purpose and plan for your break. Our hard-working participants have watched the podcast, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. But I'll do a quick summary now before we go into our Q&A. We yearn for our holidays and we can't wait for them to start. We look forward to having a break, having fun, but most of all to feeling rested, relaxed and rejuvenated. But all too often we end up feeling exhausted, stressed and disappointed. Holiday seasons like Christmas can actually be really challenging times. There may be family dynamics and relationships that lead to conflict or tension. Changing family traditions with marriages and divorces, etc., can create conflicting priorities. Sometimes we have too much togetherness with family, sometimes not enough. If there has been bereavement or loss during the year, this can be a particularly hard time. Gift buying and giving can be fraught with pressure to pick the right gifts and can create significant financial burden. Parents with kids may still be working and are having to juggle childcare, functions, entertainment, and of course work. And often people are already very stressed by the end of year, with cumulative fatigue and frantic end of year deadlines. And then the holiday season adds to our stress if we're travelling, going to too many functions, hosting too many people, just being too busy. And of course, we want to indulge ourselves and let go, so we may overeat on rich foods and consume too much alcohol, all of which even further stresses our poor, overloaded nervous systems. So I suggest in the podcast we need to precisely identify our purpose for the holidays and then devise a plan to meet that purpose. How do you want to feel during and after the holidays? For most of us, it would be relaxed and reinvigorated. But a warning, we often find it hard or perhaps ethically questionable to prioritise our own well-being. But you are perfectly allowed to do that. And for most people, their purpose might involve halving their expectations of their holiday. No, really, whatever you plan to do, that plan should revolve around reducing what you do on holidays. Pick a few favourite activities and really enjoy them while skipping the rest. As my good wife constantly reminds me, less is more. What you'll do next is categorise all of the things you're doing into either must-haves or nice-to-haves. You keep the must-haves and drastically reduce the nice-to-haves. And my advice is to use a calendar. Put in all the must-do dates and engagements. Make sure there are plenty of spaces in the calendar by 1, reducing how many events, and 2, how long they are. Your cost-benefit analyses may well mean you have to spend some time with that obnoxious uncle, that annoying child, listening to that boring conversation and so on. That's now okay because your planned timetable is balanced. You've built in time and activities for you to relax, enjoy and rejuvenate. In summary, this is all about deliberately, consciously, purposefully taking charge of your enjoyment of your break. And you might just get to have a holiday when you're on your holiday. All right, so that's by way of summary. And as always, I'm grateful that you've watched the podcast, and I'm very curious as to what it's brought up for you, what thoughts you've had, and maybe there can be some more suggestions for things that I've missed. So who wants to kick off?
I can go first today.
Thank you, Chris.
So the first 3 minutes, I literally looked at the timestamp. The first 3 minutes and 45 seconds of the podcast, I was like, yep, yep, Yep. 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 The list of like the family
Yeah,
dynamics,
yeah,
the buying, all of the like managing kids, the cumulative fatigue, all of the expectations that come around. It was
mm,
just like, yeah, this is every Christmas holiday season, it feels like, right? And
yeah,
on the gift buying also, um, just the with for kids in particular, like they get so wrapped up in like, oh, this is the season that I get stuff, as opposed to how should we actually be framing Christmas and what Christmas or the winter holidays are about.
mm,
It also can feel like everyone is asking more of us than we have
yeah,
available to give. And so it makes the holidays feel like an obligation. It's just obligation after obligation after obligation, and stress loaded in with all that. So, I used to approach this by strongly encouraging people that are close to me to say, let's go to Mexico for Christmas, where you can't fit that many toys into a suitcase, right? So it brings down the number of presents that you're getting and buying for the kids, and it transforms it around from like all of the things that we are obligated to do to actually being able to spend time together. But I also
mm,
recognize that um, that fits to your must haves, nice to haves, all of my must and nice to haves. But I'm asking all of the people that are important to me to compromise maybe what their must haves and nice to haves are in service of my list and my list exclusively.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
also not an ideal and perfect solution for all those people that I actually want to spend time with Christmas. So all of this is pointing me towards an important question
mm,
that I struggle with, which is how do you determine between a must have and a nice to have?
yeah, yeah. And obviously, that's the hardest question in this thing. And as you know, the second podcast looks more at the how to implement. But what you're pointing to here is you cannot make this plan in isolation from your loved ones, right? But it's useful, I think, to involve them in these discussions because they ought to be doing the same for themselves, right? And then you're both on the same page, at least in the overall project, right? But yes, you need the wisdom of Solomon to sometimes, because what's a must-have for someone else might be a nice to have for you, and vice versa. So there's going to be compromises, right? But the overall task is to reduce. I think one of the problems is that just exactly as you described, Chris. People are racing by this time of year. Like, even though they're tired, they're also sort of hyped up. And of course, the industrial commercial complex wants us to have us all hyped up, so we'll spend lots of money. And so there is a sort of desire for busyness, almost an urgency. So part of this is to actually create space. There's no perfect solution, though, to come back to your question. Obviously, there's not. But even if you go halfway to reducing, right? And like your solution of going to Mexico, it ticks some boxes, but there might be people who can't afford to do that, for example, or so everyone's got to make their own solution, and it actually takes some hard thought. But I think if it's done collaboratively, you can you can make some room for everyone's needs, but where everyone's actually agreeing, let's reduce. Is that a satisfactory answer, Chris? I mean,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I like the focus on that. Let's take things away, or yeah, I do appreciate like the idea behind the holiday is that it forces that.
yeah,
But
yes,
again, it's that like one-sidedness of the idea, right? And so that's why to that idea of like where, yeah, looking at everybody's must-haves and nice-to-haves and identifying where they overlap, and where they're discrepant. Yeah,
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and when there's I think when there's a question like you're juggling, get rid of it. Like it's sort of like I think that's the rule of thumb. It's like because the other thing is, as you know, stuff happens. There's stuff you didn't anticipate. It's not like So leave space, and other things will tempt you to fill it. Some of which will be great, and others will be like, no, run it through the sieve again. Yeah, fantastic. What else, guys?
Well, I, like Chris, this could not have been more timely for me. I literally was driving to the office this morning having the great debate of holiday obligations with my sister this morning. So I was so thankful to go through this podcast, and it's so unbelievable. But a big takeaway for me was like in talking about like prioritizing yourself and meeting your needs first before you start to consider those obligations.
Yes.
How do you have any tools that you would suggest in dealing with those who might take offense to you prioritizing yourself? And so an example is real life example for me this year is, saying I'm not going to host Christmas this year. I just don't want to do it. I just want to, it's been a really busy year. I just want to have time to enjoy and relax during the holidays. But then, oh, well, I wasn't invited. And those taking offense to you prioritizing yourself. So what kinds of tools might you have in dealing with those situations?
Well, and again, we'll touch on more specific strategies in the second podcast, but the first thing I think is to say that you can't control how other people react. And, but you will have a sense, I'd imagine, Karen, that of who might be offended, right? And so I would be proactive, ring them up and say, look, this is what I'm doing. And I don't want anyone to be offended. It's not about you guys. It's about me. I really need a rest, right? And just get ahead of it. So I think a lot of it is going to be about that sort of communication. And then a bit like with my answer to Chris, you can then, there's room for compromise. It's certainly not going to be that you're going to be hosting something, but you say it can be useful to have something up your sleeve if you're anticipating that relative or that person whose nose is going to be out of joint. Do you know what I mean? But I think that's probably I'd be part of the planning is thinking ahead. Who is going to be annoyed? Who's going to be hurt potentially? And maybe. As I say, getting ahead of the curve, right? Do you think that's reasonable for you? Is it practicable?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's taking into consideration those personalities who you can anticipate having a negative reaction and just framing it for them of the why and whatever that is, how that is. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess it depends how deep the hurt is going to be. I mean, this ends up being a bit complicated, but to a certain extent, I think what you're doing here is you're training people, right, to not have an expectation that you're always going to be doing the hosting, right?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, that especially coming from a people pleaser, that's been something that I've created. So putting the onus on myself of they just assuming where I'm like, yep, nope, not this time.
So that's what I was wondering that because your fears of people being upset might be disproportionate. They might be overly elevated. And you might be surprised that no one cares.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Right. And if they do, then hopefully if it's a reasonable enough relationship, they'll say something to you and you can deal with it. But and the other side of this that I think I mentioned in this podcast, I can't remember which one it was, but some people almost feel like it's unethical for them to prioritize themselves, and it's not. And you know, I think that there's something wonderful about being with someone who's genuinely happy and relaxed and chilled, right? And so when we take care of ourselves, I think we're a lot more psychologically and emotionally available to people, right? And I mean, that's not the main reason you do it, but I think it's a really nice little side effect. But it's perfectly ethical to prioritize your own happiness, especially in the way we're talking about involving those close to you to make sure their needs are being met as well. But yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Like these little fantasies that we run in our mind about all of the feelings and thoughts and potential upsets that our actions might cause, right? But you said you were on your drive talking to your sister, right? And were you suggesting to her you're not hosting this year? Is that what you did?
Actually, it was me suggesting for her to tell the rest of the family that she's not hosting.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
whole thing. We could be here for hours talking about, but
Yeah, I see. And is she a people pleaser as well?
100%. We're identical twins, so yeah, she's a people.
Oh, you're identical twins. How fascinating. I see. So it's almost, yes, I get it now. And she was worried.
She was worried. Yeah, she's worried about the blowback, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, you really then find out, don't you, who, like, I think it helps. This is going to sound a little bit, as we say in Australia, hard ass, but this could be a good way of actually stiffening up the depth of one's relationships with people. Give them a challenge, right? Just see how they rise to the challenge of not having, like in this case, your sister always being the one who hosts, right? And if they get upset, then there might have to be a conversation which will recalibrate them. Right.
I like that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That recalibration of relationship. I love it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now, Colleen, I know you've got to go pretty soon. So I thought I'd love to know what you're thinking.
Oh, thinking a lot. But I think what popped up a few minutes ago was just what you said about, at the end of the day, I think you bend over backwards and people don't put a lot of thought into it. I mean, I used to literally bend over backwards at Christmas to make sure that everything was there for my kids, for everybody. And I've just really pulled back because it doesn't matter. And I want to break it back down, and I really want my children to know what's important. And like Chris said, it's not about things, it's about traditions and that time and the simple things.
And being present with each other. And Colleen, since you've sort of pulled back a bit and stopped bending over backwards, as it were, I presume you've done that for the last few years, is that right? Now, I've been alive the last few years, and I've noticed that the Earth is still turning. The sun still rises.
Exactly.
Yeah. So has there been any blowback, as Karen was saying?
No, nothing. No. And if anything, it just makes you think about, how you do things in general, which, you don't want to get discouraged by that, but you just, everything in moderation, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, there's this sort of contagious urgency around Christmas, isn't there? That it all has to be bigger and better. I don't know. In my country, seafood is a big part of the Christmas tradition. Lobsters and prawns and and bugs and things like this, right? And people go insane. Like they buy huge amounts and they queue up for hours. To get And there's so much stress around it and expense, right? And by the time people get to the day, and then they have a few drinks because they're so stressed, then they start arguing. Is this just Australians?
The seafood part is, but I think the rest of it holds true.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's very hot when it's Christmas for us, right? So we tend to have, a cold lunch, Yeah, so I think the world will continue on. The Earth won't be knocked off its axis. And more importantly, you discover that you have far more degrees of freedom than you thought you had. When this nothing terrible happened. So you could keep paring it back, Colleen, and until you hit resistance.
Well, especially with everything going on in the world, I just feel like there really has to be some reflection about how unsettling and how hard it is for people.
Exactly, and the more time and space that people then have together, that it's not distracted by urgency and going from one place to the other, and people being tired. Maybe that'll open up a space where people can have some proper conversations about what's happening in the world, right? Which I think is really important because, as you all know, we're located in a particular epoch where it's very hard to talk about things that are contentious, sort of polarization has people either talking past each other or yelling at each other, and if we're more relaxed and we're resting, maybe we can have more intelligent conversations as well. One can hope, can't they, Terry?
I guess they can. So this is a funny one for me because I actually like hosting Christmas because I don't like the chaos of going to the in-laws and having to live by what the in-laws want to do. It's like it drives me bananas. So I actually prefer to host, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. The wild card for me is the grandmas, because the grandmas think that no rules or regulations or any emotional conduct applies to them. So trying to, cut down on the amount of plastic that enters my home with my kids.
Yeah.
And talk about what it really means versus gazillions of presents. Grandmas just blow it right out of the water. And if you try to control them, they just blow you off. They don't care. They are selfish for selfish, not selfish to be selfless.
Yes.
So they're always the wild card, or shall I say the like joker in the whole match. I cannot control. But Karen, funny enough, you can tell your sister we can host it here. So get it all done in one bang.
We're all coming.
Thank you, Terry.
I'm gonna say, let's open that up.
Beautiful.
Christmas at the McBride's household.
You're going to Mexico, Norwood. Give me
Yeah, that's right. So there's two main themes there, and they're both really interesting. Like the first one speaks to what I call an internal locus of control. In other words, you just find it far less stressful and more potentially relaxing if you're proactive, you set the parameters, you host, then it doesn't have to be bigger than Ben-Hur. It can just be what you want to do. So that fits in perfectly with what I'm suggesting. It's about you taking responsibility for the experience, all right? And so sometimes hosting is the less stressful thing. So again, this speaks to everyone's got to come to their own cost-benefit analysis, their own solution, right? And you figured out that's yours. The second thing, I don't think I've got an answer for, in the sense that
You don't have answers for grandmas?
Yeah, no. This seems to be an immutable law of the universe, that, you have your own values and your own, rules for your kids, and grandparents, they just want to spoil them, right? And if it's not with plastic toys, it'll be with lots of sweets and,
Well, I think their desire to do that is, I know all of the grandparents came from a time of
scarcity.
post-war great restraint,
Yes.
poverty.
Yeah.
They never got to live this.
Yeah,
I mean, I can even remember with a like kid, you got 1 or 2 gifts. That was it.
exactly.
The amount of presents that our kids get is in the double digits.
I know.
It's crazy.
I know.
So,
And just to touch on a couple of those things, there's a lot to teach kids here at Christmas time, and we're pushing, to put it bluntly, we're pushing shit uphill, against that commercial complex, which is constantly making suggestions to them, forcing things, towards them about what they want and what they need. And of course, when grandparents give them double digits numbers of things, each time the kid opens something, there's a little burst of enjoyment that's expressed on the face. But as you then know, it then gets cast aside to open the next one. I know, and it's just like that. And the kids then end up pretty hyped up, especially if they're eating lots of sugar and drinking red cordial, whatever. So there is a kind of serious element here in this, and I think Chris, you were referring to that as well. If you go away to Mexico or wherever, that you could smaller bags, less presents, and it's the same issue here about. I think part of our plan, if we're parents for our kids, is to inculcate, some resilience and some values against this rampant consumerist thing, because the kids end up really ratty when it's just constant. Now, of course, we all want them to be excited about getting a bike or, I think, significant gift. But I'm with you, Terry. I utterly failed in my attempts with grandparents to curtail their behaviour. Maybe it just means I'm, not as good a psychologist as I
are
thought.
you speaking about yourself by chance?
No, I'm pretty good with it.
You're speaking about marrying your wife.
Yeah, no.
You said yeah.
No. I misunderstood you at first, but no. As a grandfather and my wife as a grandmother, we're really careful with that, and and I think grandparents can do it. I don't think they have to be in the way that we've been describing, but there is a strong tendency for them just to want to give. And yeah, maybe there is some selfishness in it because it gives them so much pleasure. But this is one of the many complex dynamics that play out on holidays, especially Christmas holidays, right? And this is why I think we need to be very proactive and have space for our own well-being, whether it's exercise or just doing things that we really like or just resting or reading, so that when we do encounter the stressful moments, which will be inevitable, we're more balanced. Yeah. And we're less resentful of it. All right. I think that's enough for this particular roundtable. And we'll be talking soon about perhaps more drilling down into, now you've got your plan, what's likely to interrupt it and what strategies might we have? And we've obviously already started that conversation. All right, guys, so I'll see you soon.